Okay, we're going to come back to book 9, where we left off, which I believe is at the point at which Eve has eaten of the fruit of the forbidden tree, and with her fall, nature also shows signs of fall. So saying her rash hand in evil hour, forth reaching the fruit, she plucked, she eat. Earth felt the wound, and nature from her seat, sighing through all her wokes, gave signs of woe that all was lost. So Milton portrays the account of the fall of mankind right from the get-go as the fall of not only the human pair, which is going to be completed in the passage we'll look at today, but also the entirety of the created order with her, or at least the earth will be implicated in the fall. And again, he does it in very, very briefly in just a few lines. He will repeat that when it comes to Adam's transgression, but it's important to note that there is a sort of a cosmic significance to the fall of mankind, in which those even that are not involved in the transgression are nonetheless affected by it. And that includes God, of course, but God is not thereby corrupted by it, because as we've seen, he is his being is uncreated and is not implicated in the fall as a consequence. Otherwise it would be. But anyway, we left off here last time, and we see in response to the claim that the fruit brings knowledge and it will make her like a god, and will in some sense redound to her praise that she's chosen to disobey of her free will, and because after all, what God would give you that choice and yet not deny you the goodness of the choice? Satan makes some sort of spurious arguments. She does, the first thing she does is this: she speaks to the tree. Not only speaks to the tree, but does a little bit more than that. So let me read the passage first. But she speaks to it in terms that normally you would speak of to God. O sovereign, virtuous, precious of all trees in paradise, of operation blessed to sapience, hitherto obscured, infamed, and thy fair fruit let hang, as to no end created. But henceforth my early care, not without song, each morning and due praise shall tend thee, and the fertile burden ease of thy full branches offered free to all. Till dieted by thee I grow mature in knowledge, as the gods who all things know, though others envy what they cannot give. For had the gift been theirs, it had not been here thus grown. Experience next to thee I owe. Best guide, not following thee, I had remained in ignorance. Thou openst wisdom's way, and givest access, though secret she retire. And I perhaps am secret. Heaven is high, high and remote to see, from thence distinct each thing on earth. And other care perhaps may have diverted from continual watch our great forbidder, safe with all his spies about him. But to Adam, note the contempt and malignity towards God that she expresses here in the way she frames the whole episode as well. But now it's the first time she thinks of someone outside of herself. But to Adam, in what sort shall I appear? Shall I to him make known as yet my change, and give him to partake full happiness with me, or rather not, but keep the odds of knowledge in my power, without co-partner? So to add what wants in female sex, the more to draw his love, and render me more equal, and perhaps, a thing not undesirable, sometime superior, for inferior who is free. This may be well, but what if God have seen, and death ensue? Then I shall be no more, and Adam, wedded to another Eve, shall live with her enjoying, I extinct, a death to think. Confirm then I resolve, Adam shall share with me in bliss or woe. So dear I love him, that with him all deaths I could endure, without him live no life. So saying, from the tree her step she turned, but first low reverence done as to the power that dwelt within, whose presence had infused into the plant sciential sap, derived from nectar drink of gods. So let's just trace the argument here. She begins by acknowledging the tree as a god and her sovereign, and associates it furthermore with virtue, rather extraordinary, in a sort of travesty of the hymns to the tree of life, and says that the what she'd heard about it, that it was not to be eaten of, was an infamy, a lie, which she now knew was a lie because she, through experience, had learned otherwise. And she will henceforth praise experience as the means of knowledge, which Milton will have been observing in the development of science in his own day. Now, the scientific method of the Royal Society does not come about until after Milton's, because the Royal Society does not come into existence until after Milton writes this poem. But its motto is nullius in verba, which is trust no one's word. Nothing in words. You're to test with your own senses. You're to experience. You're to observe. You test and you verify. So experience becomes the basis of knowledge, not wisdom, not anybody else's word, but you will test for yourself. Now, I'm not sure if Milton is, he's certainly not referring to the Royal Society's motto, but he is already in amongst those who would be the gentlemen who would be involved in the Royal Society, and no doubt this methodology was now being followed there, which will then be made into a philosophy that we call empiricism. Which is the British way of understanding. It's the favored British form of philosophy. And but at its root, it denies the validity of wisdom as a form of knowledge. And so the irony here in the whole speech, and I don't want it to be lost on you, is that she has thrown away wisdom and virtue, claiming to be wise and virtuous. The irony could not be more acute. And this is through the knowledge of good and evil. And we'll get further comments on that. But Milton's commenting here about the character of knowledge that follows the fall. And I'll direct you back to what he said about, in his treatise of education, the aim of education is to restore the ruin of our first parents. Well, here's the ruin. And you can see the ruin isn't an immediate effect, although we've seen that the creation shows signs of woe already. But it's more that she immediately, her presuppositions, if you will, about the way in which knowledge operates are already totally off kilter. Wisdom is not prized, neither is virtue. Just experience. Experience associated and directed by an autonomous self. And that is, she is it, in a very self-centered speech. And even cites experience as her secondary guide. Experience next to thee I owe best guide. Not following thee I had remained in ignorance. So again, as if she had no knowledge before. But now she's learned for herself. And hereafter, the way in which knowledge will be couched in, again, following the Royal Society's footsteps, and certainly modern education, is that you must experience things in order to know them. And experience certainly is a teacher. People call it the school of hard knocks. But I'm not sure that you need to jump into every puddle to know that it's rained. I mean, there's sufficient signs. You don't have to commit every failure in life to know this doesn't work. You can intuit it. You can follow the wisdom of your forebears. You can follow the truth of God's word, all of that. But it's the methodology of doubt, skepticism, which he's talking about here. I will have to experience it myself. Very much a part of the Cartesian revolution of will, as it were. The modern approach of philosophy predicated on doubt and making certain for yourself. So experience, she praises, best guide not following them who had remained in ignorance, thou openest wisdom's way. So since Christ is the wisdom of God, and by wisdom he created all things, to say that she now knows wisdom where she didn't before is, again, heavily ironic. And given access, though secret she retire, and I perhaps am secret. So now she then again reflects on herself. It's a very self-absorbed speech. If it were a speech in a dramatic play, we would call this a soliloquy. She'd walk to the front of the stage and address the audience, even though she's really actually just thinking within her own thoughts. And thinks now of secrecy. Remember that word secret was already referred to what happened when original sin took place in the mind of Satan. He thought that he was in secret, even though in heaven, in the full view of everyone else, he committed his acts or treason against God in his own mind, and then it sprung out of his side, which they called sin. And he was enamored with her in secret, so he thought. And then the fruits of that come evident. But what's interesting about her claim of wisdom here is that she thinks that God, who is omniscient, may not see what she's just done. Maybe he's not really observant. He hasn't noticed. And, the great forbidder now he is. Safe with all his spies about him. Again, suggesting, what do we call this these days? I can't remember what you call it. But it's basically predicating upon God the way she looks at things, claiming that he is guilty of what she is, secrecy and spying. And you can see this when she then turns her thoughts to Adam. But to Adam, in what sort shall I appear? This is a natural step to think of when she considers what has just happened with the serpent. The serpent appeared still like a serpent, and she appears still like herself. But she recognizes a change within her. Will Adam notice the change? Because if on the outside she still looks like a woman as she did before, how about the rest of her? Will he acknowledge the development of her, the new excellence she believes that she possesses? Shall I to him make known as yet my change, and give him to partake full happiness with me? Well, if she were good, she would immediately say yes. She would act like God and share in goodness, not being selfish. Or rather not, to keep the odds of knowledge in my power without co-partner. The power motivation. It gets worse than this. Or to add what wants in female sex, the more to draw his love and render me more equal and perhaps not undesirable, sometimes superior. Again, satanic thoughts. Who thought himself impaired by Messiah's being anointed as king. He thought himself impaired. Thought he should have been above that. And Eve, again, is not going to be satisfied even with equality. She wants superiority, even towards her human partner. And further from that, again, inferior who is free. Again, Milton puts familiar early feminist discourse in the mouth of a fallen being. I don't think this is what he's doing at all. That might be true. He's not interested in feminist discourse. He's interested in the parallels between her speech and Satan's speech. This is exactly how Satan argues and thinks. He's not thinking about early feminist speech. So there's a comment from the commentators, which is okay. but surely not what Milton's thinking. Inferior who is free. This may be well, but again, there's an immediate assault on hierarchy, and this is probably true. As soon as she decides that she's going to be as a god, knowing both good and evil, she announces that God is no longer her God and claims that she has risen in the ranks, but she immediately then bows down to a tree, which is below her in the created order. It doesn't even have, not only does it not have reason, it doesn't even have the capacity for motion. It doesn't move. It nourishes itself for sure, but it has no capacity for thinking or feeling. And she yet bows down to the tree. So she claims to have gone up in the order of creation and bows down to something far below her. So totally confused, and great irony throughout the speech. And then she has another thought, which somehow didn't occur to her at this point. But what if God have seen, and death ensue? Because of course that was the threat of transgression. Then I shall be no more, and Adam wedded to another Eve shall live with her. So jealousy. A death to think, even. So confirm that, and I resolve Adam shall share with me in bliss or woe. So dear I love him. Well, now she comes to her love of Adam, but it is only inspired by the knowledge that she may die. And so she's going to make sure that if she has to die, he's going to die. So it's the exact pattern of thought that Satan has exhibited. If I can't achieve the bliss that my transgression, my original sin incited, then I'm going to make sure that others suffer equally. He's going to be co-partner with him. And she says, confirm that Adam shall share with me in bliss or woe. So dear I love him, that with him all deaths I could endure, without him live no life. So she lies to herself. I know what the phrase is. It's gaslighting. She's been gaslighting God throughout this, accusing him of things that she herself is guilty of. And as I say, at the end of it all, she bows and does reverence to the tree, as if there were something in the tree. Theologians will comment on this and say there's actually nothing in the tree that was poisonous, as it were. It's not that. What was in the transgression was in the commandment. It's not the tree, because otherwise the tree, the fruit of the tree would have killed them instantly, or even slowly. And if it's slow, well then it's pretty slow, glacially slow. They're going to live for a very long time. But it's the death that they live is rather a spiritual death. It's a death of relation to God, which you can see the consequences of that are serious and far beyond her original apprehension. Then we turn to Adam. Adam, the while, now I've mentioned to you a few times the importance of hands in this, and flowers. Flowers being the emblems of love. You give a woman flowers, right? It's the manifestation of something that you can't see. Adam, the while waiting desirous her return, had wove of choicest flowers a garland to adorn her tresses and her rural labor's crown, as reapers oft are wont their harvest queen. Great joy he promised to his thoughts, and new solace in her return, so long delayed. Yet oft his heart, divine of something ill, misgave him. He the faltering measure felt, and forth to meet her went, the way she took that morn when first they parted. By the tree of knowledge he must pass, there he her met, scarce from the tree returning. In her hand a bough of fairest fruit, that downy, smiled, new gathered, and ambrosial smell diffused. To him she hasted, in her face excuse came prologue, an apology to prompt, which with bland words at will she thus addressed. Now, they both have something in their hands. He has flowers of adoration for her. She has fruit. The fruit is of the exact opposite. It's to bring him down. It's to kill him. she's actually slightly oblivious to it. And this is part of the consequence of sin, is a lack of awareness of sin. One of the worst fruits of sin is that you are to a certain degree ignorant of it when you do it. But far worse is it creates more sin. It doesn't stop with the person who commits it. Gets passed on. And so now in her face, excuse came prologue and apology to prompt. So she's already getting her excuses in before even any dialogue has happened. Like a guilty child who's done something wrong, and they are aware of it, and they're trying to frame the context of the dialogue that will then happen by getting in their apologies, excuses first. Hast thou not wondered, Adam, at my stay? Thee I have missed, and thought it long deprived thy presence, agony of love till now not felt, nor shall be twice. For never more mean I to try what rash, untried I sought, the pain of absence from thy sight. But strange hath been the cause, and wonderful to hear. This tree is not, as we are told, a tree of danger tasted, nor to evil unknown opening the way, but of divine effect to open eyes, and make them gods who taste, and hath been tasted such. The serpent wise, or not restrained as we, or not obeying, hath eaten of the fruit, and is become not dead, as we are threatened, but thenceforth endued with human voice and human sense, reasoning to admiration, and with me persuasively hath so prevailed that I have also tasted, and have also found the effects to correspond. Opener mine eyes, dim erst, dilated spirits, ampler heart, and growing up to Godhead, which for thee chiefly I sought. Liar. Without thee can despise, for bliss, as thou hast part, to me is bliss, tedious unshared with thee, and odious soon. Thou therefore also taste, that equal lot may join us, equal joy as equal love, lest thou, not tasting, different degree disjoin us, and I then too late renounce deity for thee, when fate will not permit. Her argument here is appallingly bad. It's so bad. It's manipulative, it's coercive, and it will persuade no one. So compare the unfallen Eve's argumentation with the fallen Eve's, and it's all what we call motivated reasoning. Makes no sense. She can't renounce what she's done. She hasn't got divinity. If she had divinity, she couldn't lose it. And she didn't do it for him, or she wouldn't have done it on her own. And it's not that she could have foregone it if he's not willing to do it, because otherwise she would have brought it to him and let's consider this together. Shall we do this? She's taken it. So her motives are concealed, perhaps from her, perhaps not. It's unclear from the dialogue, but it's clear to the reader that her motives are not as she pronounces them. She's not the liar that Satan is. Not yet skilled in the art. Thus Eve with countenance blithe her story told, but in her cheek distemper flushing glowed. Now, not long ago we saw her face. Her face referred to, and her hand. In her face, excuse came prologue and apology to prompt, but her cheek has distemper, flushing. What's the distemper? Well, it may be humiliation. She's certainly brazen here, but there's a sign in her face of something that's not right. And on the other side, Adam, soon as he heard the fatal trespass done by Eve, amazed, remember that word amazed again, use that, or Milton used that word repeatedly to talk about how Satan misled Eve so that she got amazed and lost her way. Adam is also amazed. Astonied stood and blank, while horror chill ran through his veins and all his joints relaxed. From his slack hand the garland wreathed for Eve down dropped, and all the faded roses shed. Now this is pathetic fallacy right here, but the roses which he had immediately wither as they drop from his hand. And the roses then show his own mind here. The roses show signs of death, which he, in his mind, think, there's a dead woman speaking to me here. She's in some sense dead in God's sight. Speechless he stood and pale. Remember, she just had excuse in her face. He stands speechless and pale, till thus at length first to himself he inward silence broke. So again, now again, if it were dramatized, another monologue. Soliloquy, O fairest of creation, last and best of all God's works, creature in whom excelled whatever can to sight or thought be formed, holy, divine, good, amiable, or sweet, how art thou lost? How on a sudden lost, defaced, deflowered, no, face, flowered, defaced, deflowered, and now to death devote. Milton plays on the flower and the face here repeatedly. Remember when in 1 Corinthians, when this disquisition on love, 1 Corinthians 13, now we see as in a mirror or a glass darkly, but then face to face to see God's face. They were wont to see God in the garden daily. Now they will no longer see his face. They have lost their face. C.S. Lewis makes a great deal of this in his little novel, Till We Have Faces, about having the face. What does it mean to have a face? Animals don't have faces, by the way. Their eyes are on either side of their head. They see rather differently. There's a lot of conversation about this or discussion of this amongst theologians about human faces being different than animal faces. You wouldn't think it, but it is there. We tend to anthropomorphize animals and think of them having face. Look at their little face, and they're looking at me, and I know what is meant there, but a little different here. But now to death devote. Not to me. He's not fooled by a word she said. Rather, how hast thou yielded to transgress the strict forbiddance? How to violate the sacred fruit forbidden? Some cursed fraud of enemy hath beguiled thee, yet unknown, and me with thee hath ruined. For with thee certain my resolution is to die. How can I live without thee? How forego thy sweet converse and love so dearly joined? To live again in these wild woods forlorn? Should God afford another Eve, and I another rib afford, yet loss of thee would never from my heart. No, I feel the link of nature draw me. Flesh of flesh, bone of my bone thou art, and from thy state mine never shall be parted bliss or woe. So having said, as one from sad dismay recomforted, and after thoughts disturbed, submitting to what seemed remediless, thus in calm mood his words to Eve he turned. I'll get to those words in a minute. But Milton's little description of the characters after they speak is important here as well. But note again the reference to the loss of face, to the loss of the flower, the beauty. He's just talked about her beauty and goodness and so forth, but you've defaced yourself, you've deflowered yourself. The flowers I had in my hand have dropped withered to the ground. There's a sense of everything having been terribly marred here, but Adam also entertains the thought of, how about another Eve then? Just as Eve did, so does he. What is one of the possibilities here is that, he created Eve from a rib. He can do another such miracle. Adam decides that he will not have that, and he will resolve to be with her because of his love for her. She professed this, but we could see that was totally disingenuous. On his part, it doesn't seem quite as disingenuous. It seems admirable. However, now here's the problem in the account in Genesis. So when the woman saw that the fruit tree was good for food, and it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. Milton has separated the human pair. His difficulty here is accounting for what goes on here in the garden. God gives Adam the command not to eat of the fruit of the tree, and that was before Eve was created in the account. I don't think we need to take it as chronological necessarily per se, but it's clear that it is given specifically to Adam there, and that his actions are very important here. If Eve were the only one, then original sin would not be completed, and that's how Milton's going to present it as a way, complete. It's yet incomplete if Adam hasn't done it. He was given the command. He has not protected Eve from the intruder, and he was warned, and he was told, in fact, to guard and protect. That was his gardener's duty, was to keep, tend and to keep. He hasn't done that. But Milton has separated the human pair in his account. In the Genesis account, it's not so clear. And in fact, in verse 6, it says that he was with her and he ate. But he's not here in the beginning of the account, right? In Genesis 3, 1-5, there's no indication that Adam is there because there are only two characters speaking. And so Milton has taken the liberty of seeing them as separate. And maybe it's not the liberty, it makes sense of the dialogue that's transpired. Otherwise, Adam is standing there, the serpent speaking to Eve, and he's standing like a tree and does nothing. She eats of the fruit and then passes it to him, and he eats it as well. Is he there all along in agreement and is happy for her to be deceived in the process? Perhaps so. Then you have the problem, though, in the New Testament, where it says that Adam was not deceived, but Eve was. So that additional text probably pushes it in the direction where Milton has separated the two. That's my sense, right? Because it says that Adam was not deceived, and so Milton needs to account for that in his account of the story. Well, how is it possible then that he would have eaten it, or it would have taken place, the original fall, etc., if he had been present for that particular temptation? Yes.
Does it mean that the fall isn't complete when she sinned? Because at 780, or just before 780, it says, or right after, earth felt the wound, and nature from her seat signed through all her work. That all was lost.
Yes. But in line 1000, earth trembled from her entrails as groan in pangs, and nature gave a second groan. Skies lowered in muttering thunder. Some sad drops wept at completing of the mortal sin original. That's what I meant. If there had been no signs in nature of Eve's transgression, that would be rather odd, as if she didn't matter, right? So he has to give some sign that even has a consequence for nature. After all, her very name means life. And Milton's depicted Eve throughout as, in some sense, being, well, in fact, Adam himself. And I don't think Adam's a liar. He's not flattering it when it's a soliloquy that she is the best of God's created works, all of them, and the fairest of all, the best of all. And so, of course, when she falls, the rest of creation, which she is, in a sense, the crown of creation, that's how he sees her, is going to fall along with her. But it's not a complete sin until he transgresses as well. Remember, he personally, individually, has been given the prohibition. So that's why I say it, though. Yep. It's not to diminish what he says there about her fall being significant. It's certainly that. But Milton himself suggests it's not complete until Adam does the ill or replicates her ill deed. But he is guided here by exactly what it says in the New Testament, that Adam is not deceived. So Milton has no choice, really, if he wants to use a biblical account to follow that narrative. He can separate the two because the text is rather ambiguous. He cannot ascribe a different motivation for it if the motivation's been made clear in Scripture. Bold deed thou hast presumed, adventurous Eve, says Adam, and peril great provoked, who thus hast dared, had it been only coveting to eye that sacred fruit. Sacred to abstinence. They're not prohibited from coveting it, actually. But what Adam is doing here already as the man who is not fallen is to recognize the importance of motivation and action. There's sort of a continuum. If you are coveting it, even remember, it's the 10th commandment, not to covet. It's a form of sin. So even coveting it would have been a bad thing. You should have despised the very possibility of eating the fruit. Coveting it alone would have been, but that wouldn't have actually been the prohibition. You're not to eat of it. But again, the Hebrew sense of verbs here, there's a sense of purposiveness in the commandment. And so the eating is the outcome of the motivation to act. But again, Milton could not portray fallen motivations. He can only portray fallen actions, and the motivations follow after the fact. So now we have corrupted hearts. We do things for the wrong reasons. Eve didn't do it because she was a corrupt being. She did it because she was misled. So when we fall into sin, we're not quite in Eve's position. We're already corrupted by her sin. Original sin gets passed on in some sense. It's part of the human nature. Not so for her. And Milton's been pretty consistent in trying to portray what I think is a very difficult thing to do, which is to portray unfallen beings as a fallen man to a fallen audience, and the motivations without overdoing it on one side or the other. Anyway, bold deed thou hast presumed, had it only been coveting to eye that sacred fruit, sacred to abstinence, much more to taste it under ban to touch. But past, who can recall, or done undo? Not God omnipotent, nor fate. Yet so, perhaps thou shalt not die. Perhaps the fact is not so heinous now, foretasted fruit, profaned first by the serpent, by him first who made common and unhallowed ere our taste, nor yet on him found deadly. He yet lives, as thou saidst, and gains to live as man, higher degree of life. Inducement strong to us, as likely tasting to attain proportional assent, which cannot be but to be gods, or angels, demigods. Nor can I think that God, creator wise, though threatening, will in earnest to destroy us, his prime creatures, dignified so high, set over all his works, which in our fall, for us created, needs with us must fail, dependent made. So God shall uncreate, be frustrate, do, undo, and labor lose. Not well conceived of God, who though his power creation could repeat, yet would be loath us to abolish, lest the adversary triumph and say, fickle their state whom God most favors, who can please him long? Me first he ruined, now mankind, whom will he next? Matter of scorn, not to be given the foe. This is the same argumentation, by the way, in different forms, has been presented in heaven, first of all, in Book 3, between the Son and the Father. The Son presenting the same form of argument, what if? And it would be to the Father's dishonor if this were to happen, etc. Also by Eve, and now by Adam. So their speeches come back to the same sorts of topics here. And what God would do, must do, could do, etc. And he comes at this, at the end of it all. However, I with thee have fixed my lot, certain to undergo like doom. If death consort with thee, death is to me as life. So forcible within my heart I feel the bond of nature. Draw me to my own in thee. For what thou art is mine. Our state cannot be severed. We are one flesh. To lose thee were to lose myself. So Adam. No comment from the narrator. So Adam, and thus Eve to him replied. So immediately she replies, but there's no interjection of the commentator here at this point. Again, important. He doesn't want to give us the editorial comment of the narrator, which would actually interrupt the potency of the scene. This is a key moment in the whole dialogue. Adam has not yet eaten the fruit. He says this to Eve. Eve responds immediately, because of course he's just said that he is going to put her above God. And he does so out of love, which is a strong appeal. Milton's audience, theologically minded, will see rather differently that he is foregoing the love of God for the love of Eve, and actually committing a greater betrayal than the bond of nature, because he's a spiritual being. He's made in the image of God. He's not made in the image of Eve. And he suggests that there's no way out for God in this scenario. And from his vantage point, perhaps there isn't. And here here Milton fails to do what I think might be impossible to do, which is to present an unfallen man in his reasoning that will lead him to the transgression. Because he talks like a fallen man. He's already fallen in his thoughts. And how else could you do it? I mean, our thoughts precede our deeds. If he's going to give a motivation for it, the best way he could have done it, perhaps, is Eve comes along with the fruit. He hears that she's fallen, and he just grabs it and eats it. Right? Just no dialogue, just resign, whatever. But as soon as he has to explain his thoughts here, I think he fails to provide us with the logic from an unfallen being. And note the Genesis text doesn't even bother with it. Just avoids the excuse, whatever Adam comes up with here. But Milton does do this. And he vows to die with her if such need be. But he says that, again, God cannot do anything about this. But we've already heard in Genesis 3 he can do something about it, and he will do something about it. And what he will do about it is he himself will bear the sin of mankind. Now there it's the complete mankind, but he himself will become man. This is far from even unfallen Adam's thoughts, that God would so love them that he would bear the punishment of their transgression. Doesn't even consider it, because it's unmerited, and God is just. And this is gracious. It's not justice, it's grace. And we've already seen how grace and justice are met and are fulfilled in one another in the discussion of the atonement in Book 3. Very important. But note that even unfallen man can't conceive of redemption. And God's atonement is becoming human flesh and bearing their sin. Anyway, so Adam, and thus Eve to him replied, O glorious trial of exceeding love, illustrious evidence, example high, engaging me to emulate, but short of thy perfection. How shall I attain, Adam, from whose dear side I boast me sprung, and gladly of our union hear thee speak? One heart, one soul in both, whereof good proof this day affords, declaring thee resolved, rather than death or aught than death more dread shall separate us, linked in love so dear, to undergo with me one guilt, one crime, if any be, of tasting this fair fruit, whose virtue, for of good still good proceeds, direct, or by occasion hath presented this happy trial of thy love, which else so eminently never had been known. Were it, I thought, death menace would ensue this my attempt, I would sustain alone the worst, and not persuade thee. Rather die deserted, than oblige thee with a fact pernicious to thy peace, chiefly assured remarkably so late of thy so true, so faithful love unequaled. But I feel far otherwise the event, not death but life augmented, opened eyes, new hopes, new joys, taste so divine, that what of sweet before hath touched my sense, flat seems to this, and harsh. On my experience, Adam, freely taste, and fear of death delivered to the winds. If I thought you were going to die, I would never let you eat it. But I am convinced by my experience it will be far the opposite for you, because I love you just as much as you love me. Okay. It's an extraordinary thing. Disingenuous. We've already seen her motivations. But she lies well in response to his profession. But again, so there's what they say, and then there's what they think, and what the reader thinks in here. So it's a rich reading experience here. So saying, she embraced him, and for joy tenderly wept, much one that he, his love, had so ennobled, as if he had made it greater. And he'd made it greater by doing what? Sacrificing God to her. Again, he raised it up. When you transgress against love divine, you've transgressed love. He's done the exact opposite of love her, because you can't contradict what love is and still be loving. This is not loving. But at any rate, that's the language that the human pair think here, had so ennobled as of choice to incur divine displeasure for her sake, or death, in recompense for such compliance bad, such recompense best merits. There's Milton's comment. Compliance bad. From the bough she gave him of that fair enticing fruit with liberal hand. He scrupled. Now here's the interesting point, and again, editorial comment. He scrupled not to eat against his better knowledge, not deceived, but fondly overcome with female charm. So all of the words that she's given here, he didn't buy any of it. He talked that way, she responded in kind, he knew better, he still did wrong. So is not the guilt worse on his part? And the answer is yes. This is the problem here. It's not a higher or a nobler action on his part. It is a less noble action. In full awareness of what was happening, not deceived. So here's the problem for Milton. As I said, this is the problem. The account of the reason that mankind will be forgiven is that Satan deceived them, but Adam is not deceived. Eve was. So what God said in book 3 about his motivation for sending his son is proved a little bit untrue here in the account, because Adam has actually knowingly done this. So difficult. At any rate, fondly overcome with female charm. Earth trembled from her entrails, as if the earth is now personified. She has a stomach, a gut, from her entrails, from her deep parts, as again in pangs, labor. There's labor pains of the earth. It's like it's travailing here. And nature gave a second groan. The sky lowered, and muttering thunder, some sad drops wept at completing of the mortal sin original. And that, again, terrific. The whole of creation weeps and shows signs of woe. While Adam took no thought, eating his fill, nor Eve, to iterate her former trespass, feared, the more to soothe him with her loved society, the more that now, as with some new wine intoxicated, both they swam in mirth, and fancy that they feel divinity within them, breeding wings wherewith to scorn the earth. So note, the consequence of this is not that they bow down to the tree. They see themselves above the earth. They hate the created order. They want to be emancipated from the creation. This is the beginning of science fiction right here. To leave the planet and the prison house which the earth has become for beings, spiritual beings who are no longer bound by their physical origins. But that false fruit far other operations first displayed. Carnal desire inflaming, he on Eve began to cast lascivious eyes. She him as wantonly repaid, in lust they burn. Till Adam thus gan Eve to dalliance move. So, for the first time, he sees her as a delicacy. he looks upon her as a thing, and is burning with lust. Now, lust is a perverted way of looking at an object of love with different designs than the good of the being there. It's a selfish motivation. But they each, in their perversion, claim to be divinized in the act. Again, it's not without reason that the Canaanite gods are often fertility gods. Same with most of the fertility rituals throughout the earth accounted for in that great work, The Golden Bough by Fraser. He talks about the various fertility cults throughout the world. Anyway, Eve, now I see thou art exact of taste, and elegant of sapience no small part, since to each morning's savor we apply, and palate called judicious. Well, he becomes a connoisseur now of fruit, but he's also going to be a connoisseur of flesh, her flesh. And palate called judicious, I the praise yield thee. So well this day thou hast purveyed. Much pleasure we have lost, while we abstain from this delightful fruit, not known, nor known till now true relish tasting. If such pleasure be in things to us forbidden, it might be wished, for this one tree had been forbidden 10. But come, so well refreshed, now let us play, as meet is after such delicious fare. For never did thy beauty since the day I saw thee first, and wedded thee, adorned with all perfections, so inflame my sense with ardor to enjoy thee. Fairer now than ever bounty of this virtuous tree. So said he, and forbore not glance or toy of amorous intent, well understood of Eve, whose eye darted contagious fire. Her hand he seized, and to a shady bank thick overhead with verdant roof embowered, he led her nothing loath. Flowers were the couch, pansies and violets and asphodel, and hyacinth, earth's freshest, softest lap. There their fill of love and love's disport took largely of their mutual guilt, the seal, the solace of their sin, till dewy sleep oppressed them, wearied with their amorous play. Soon as the force of that fallacious fruit, that with exhilarating vapor bland about their spirits had played, and inmost powers made air, now exhaled and grosser sleep bred of unkindly fumes, with conscious dreams encumbered, now had left them, up they rose as from unrest, and each the other viewing soon found their eyes how opened and their minds how darkened. Innocence, that as a veil had shadowed them from knowing ill, was gone. Just confidence and native righteousness and honor from about them, naked left to guilty shame. He covered, but his robe uncovered more. So again, the Genesis text here in 3, let me go back to 2. Right before the temptation, very important context here. The one flesh, they were both naked, man and wife, and were not ashamed. Right before the passage at hand here, they were naked and not ashamed. Immediately after this, then the eyes of both were open, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. So they are suddenly aware that they're naked. Now, it's not because of sex itself. Again, Milton's been very careful. I said this back in book 4 to show a sexual union between Adam and Eve before the fall, lest we think, as some of the early church fathers did, that it was actually the sexual act which was the original sin in some sense, or implicated, or a cause of it. In no way do they want to repeat that. And Milton's is clear not to fall into the Gnostic heresy that the body is somehow evil and the spirit is good. That would be a serious problem, which he avoids by doing that. But now he does dig down into this passage here, in which they now awake from their dalliance, which was motivated by lust rather than love, and they now see what they have lost for the first time. So their eyes are opened as they were told they would be, but their minds have been darkened. And darkened to one particular thing, they noticed for the first time that they're naked. And they, what would make them think that they were naked? The fact that they see the other. And when they see the other, and this is an interesting thing, when they see the other person, they're aware that they look at the other person in a way which, if they do, the other person can also do. And if that's it, then I want to cover myself. Now they have a sinful mind, and it's revealed in the fact that they're aware that they can be looked upon in a way that they don't quite like. And so, cover. And the fact that they cover themselves shows what you can't see, which is somebody's mind. Their mind is seen in the way that they act here to cover themselves. So rose the day-night strong, and now he's going to refer explicitly to Samson, which we will see is, got it up here. So rose the day-night strong Herculean Samson from the harlot lap of Philistine Delilah. We'll come to that in Samson Agonistes, the last work we'll look at on the course. From the harlot lap of Philistine Delilah, and waked shorn of his strength. They, destitute and bare of all their virtue. So they talked about the virtue of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now they're shorn of all their virtue. So everything that they said they had, they have been deprived of it. There's no wisdom and there's no virtue left in them. Silent, and in face, again reference to the face, and in face confounded, long they sat, and as strucken mute, just like when Adam first met Eve. He just couldn't speak. At length gave utterance to these words constrained. Remember his first words to her, how lovely, how sacrificial. O Eve, in evil hour thou didst give ear to that false worm, of whomsoever taught to counterfeit man's voice. True in our fall, false in our promised rising. Since our eyes opened, we find indeed, and find we know both good and evil, good lost, and evil God. Bad fruit of knowledge, if this be to know, which leaves us naked thus, of honor void, of innocence, of faith, of purity, our wonted ornaments now soiled and stained. And in our faces, evident the signs of foul concupiscence, whence evil store, even shame, the last of evils, of the first be sure then. How shall I behold the face henceforth of God or angel? So now again a reference to face. How shall I? And the answer is you won't. Erst with joy and rapture so oft beheld, those heavenly shapes will dazzle now this earthly with their blaze insufferably bright. Oh, might I here in solitude live savage. Remember I talked about solitude and society, a theme of Milton's repeatedly in Comus, the solitude of his heroine. And here, and we've seen Uriel, who on his own stood against the cohort that rebelled against God. Here he is in solitude and would rather live savage in some glade obscured where highest woods impenetrable to star or sunlight spread their umbrage broad, and brown as evening. Cover me, ye pines, ye cedars with innumerable boughs. Hide me where I may never see them more. But let us now, as in bad plight, devise what best may for the present serve to hide the parts of each from other that seem most to shame obnoxious and unseemliest seen. Some tree whose broad smooth leaves together sewed and girded on our loins may cover round those middle parts, that this newcomer shame there sit not and reproach us as unclean. It's an extraordinary speech. So counseled he, and both together went into the thickest wood, There soon they chose the fig tree, not that kind for fruit renowned, but such as this day to Indians known in Malabar or Deccan spreads, her arms branching so broad and long that in the ground the bended twigs take root, and daughters grow about the mother tree, a pillared shade, high overarched, and echoing walks between. There oft the Indian herdsman, shunning heat, shelters and cool, and tends his pasturing herds as loopholes cut through thickest shade. Those leaves they gathered, broad as Amazonian targe, and with what skill they had, together sewed, to gird their waist, vain covering as if to hide their guilt and dreaded shame. And now the narrator interjects, oh, how unlike to that first naked glory. Such of late Columbus found the American, so girt. Interesting. So again, in response to this, Milton now moves to races that, to the European mind, are in some sense savages. He goes to in the sense that they're pagans. They're not Christians. So he thinks about the Indian, the subcontinent, and then he goes to the Americas. And the depiction of the natives there as well, who are similarly not particularly well clad. The Europeans had a great deal of speculation on what this might mean. Who are these people? Where did they come from? How do they relate to Adam and Eve? In what state do we find them? But at such of late Columbus found the Americans so girt with feathered cincture, naked else and wild among the trees on isles and woody shores, thus fenced, and as they thought, their shame in part covered, but not at rest or ease of mind. They sat them down to weep. Not only tears rained at their eyes, but high winds worse within began to rise. High passions, anger, hate, mistrust, suspicion, discord, and shook sore their inward state of mind, calm region once and full of peace, now tossed and turbulent. So what he will demonstrate here, when Adam and Eve fall, the creation falls, the sky lowers and weeps. Now we see the microcosm of this macrocosm. Mankind has the same sort of tempest within. It's not only the shame and the signs of woe that they will exhibit in their minds, they will be now blown about by their passions. Their passions will no longer be guided by their reason. Their reason's no longer directed by goodness. They're no longer covered with righteousness. They're no longer at peace. They are all over the place. These are, again, signs of the fall. They will become like didos, right? Given over to the passions. For understanding ruled not, and the will heard not her lore, both in subjection now to sensual appetite, who from beneath, usurping over sovereign reason, claimed superior sway. From thus distempered breast. Now, if you go to Lewis's Abolition of Man, I've talked about this in my courses with you. There's a hierarchy within the human being of the reason, the will, and the passions. The reason is supposed to exercise through the virtues of the breast, the chest, the passions, the lust, the desires, the appetites. Everyone has appetites. We need to eat food. We need nurturance of all sorts. But we are to be ruled by our reason through our virtues. Our virtues lead us up to follow our reason. Here they have no virtue. The virtue's been gone. They've hollowed their chests out. There's no virtue left. Their passions rule over their reason. It's an immediate response to a terrible calamity. They're men without chests, if you will, right away. They will need to recover this state through education. The education will come through being acquainted with the fact that they have a Savior. But that's not yet come. Here we encounter two, what Lewis calls men without chests, Adam and Eve. From thus distempered breast, isn't this great? Distempered breast, so the temperance is the virtue. There's no control over it whatsoever. Adam is estranged in look and altered style. Remember before, his style was very pleasing, and he looked in her face and there was love in it. all of this. It keeps referring to the faces and the style of eloquence and speech and so forth. Speech intermitted thus to Eve, renewed. And now these are short and angry speeches. Wouldst thou hadst hearkened to my words and stayed with me, as I besought thee when that strange desire of wandering this unhappy morn I know not whence possessed thee, we had then remained still happy, not as now despoiled of all our good, shamed, naked, miserable. Let none henceforth seek needless cause to approve the faith they owe. When earnestly they seek such proof, conclude, they then begin to fail. So he's the full frontal attack. He attacks her. To whom soon moved with touch of blame, thus Eve, what words have passed thy lips, Adam severe? Imputes thou that to my default, or will of wandering, as thou call'st it, which, who knows, but might as ill have happened, thou being by? Or to thyself, perhaps, hadst thou been there, or here the attempt, thou couldst not have discerned fraud in the serpent, speaking as he spake. No ground of enmity between us known. Why he should mean me ill, or seek to harm? Was I to have never parted from thy side? As good have grown there as still a lifeless rib. Being as I am, why didst not thou, the head, command me absolutely not to go? Going into such danger as thou saidst, too facile then thou didst not much gainsay. Nay, didst permit, approve, and fair dismiss. Hadst thou been firm and fixed in thy dissent, neither had I transgressed, nor thou with me. Okay, you're going to give it to me, I'll give it back to you. To whom then first incensed Adam replied. He's incensed for the first time. Is this the love? Is this the recompense of mine to thee, ingrateful Eve, expressed immutable when thou wert lost, not I, who might have lived and enjoyed immortal bliss, yet willingly chose rather death with thee, and am I now upbraided as the cause of thy transgressing? Not enough severe, it seems, in thy restraint. What could I more? I warned thee, I admonished thee, foretold the danger and the lurking enemy that lay in wait. Beyond this had been force, and force upon free will hath here no place. But confidence then bore thee on, secure either to meet no danger or to find matter of glorious trial. And perhaps I also erred in overmuch admiring what seemed in thee so perfect, that I thought no evil durst attempt thee. Now, but I rue that error now, which has become my crime. And thou the accuser. Thus it shall befall him who to worth in women overtrusting lets her will rule. Restraint she will not brook, and left to herself, if evil thence ensue, she first his weak indulgence will accuse. Thus they, in mutual accusation, spent the fruitless hours. Wonderful conclusion. The fruitless hours. It's all about the fruit of the forbidden tree. Spent the fruitless hours, but neither self-condemning. And of their vain contest appeared no end. Now it's become a battle of the sexes, if you will. Who's worse? No end to that one. And note in Milton's commentary, they are condemning each other justly on both sides, but neither is admitting any wrong. They see a log in the other's eye and they see a speck in the other's eye and they can't see the log in their own. In both cases. That's what sin does. Distorts our perspective of our own sin and other sin. Both cases. They're both correct in this case, of course. We see it on both sides. Remember, we're the observer. Milton's aim here is not to justify the ways of Adam or justify the ways of Eve, but to justify the ways of God. To man collectively. And it's a terrific end to a great book. But he has already said it's a tragedy. He's telling a tragedy here. And it's a tragedy in which we're all implicated. When man falls, we take no delight in Adam's fall or Eve's fall. It's our fall. It could have been avoided. They were sufficient to have stood. But because they were free to fall and they chose unwisely, we have fallen with them. But his account in Paradise Lost is that there is a Redeemer. And we'll come to that next time. In Book 10, we'll see the response in heaven. Remember, Book 3 started us in heaven for the first time. Book 10, having gone in Book 9 to the earthly paradise, just like in Book 4, there's a parallelism. We'll go back to heaven and see what the verdict from heaven is on all this. Because at this moment, Milton has kept God's omniscient counsel from our attention at any rate. He comes to that in Book 10. We know that God sees all throughout, but he does not bring that to the forefront of the narrative for various reasons. But one of them is just simply the structure. And it wouldn't do well to have God constantly alert. Like you'd say, well, God, why is God not acting here if he's at all points? They would forefront that consideration, which would rather be inappropriate because it would contradict their freedom to do exactly what they did. He would then be meddling or not intervening or whatever, and there would be accusation on our part, unjust though it might be. Still, we would come to that. So next time we'll go back to the Council of Heaven and see what happens there, and also see how Satan reacts. And Satan will go down to hell and pronounce his victory, and we'll see what he gets for that. He will get great approval from below. But what will that look like?